An old man sits in a cave near the wilderness of En-Gedi. It is the year 1000 before Christ, give or take. The lamp at his elbow is clay, and the oil in it is almost gone. He is writing on a scroll stretched across his knees. He has been a shepherd. He has been a fugitive. He has been a king. Tonight, he is just a man with a reed pen and a heart that will not stop shaking. You should know what he is writing about. He is writing about a death, not his own, not a death he has seen. A death he could not possibly have imagined, because the empire that will commit it has not been born yet. The method has not been invented yet. The man at the center of it will not be born for 10 more centuries. But the old man is writing it anyway. He is writing about pierced hands and pierced feet, about soldiers gambling for clothes at the foot of something he never names, about a crowd that mocks, about a thirst that goes unanswered. And he is writing, in the very first line, a cry. 5 words in his own language that will be quoted exactly in the original Aramaic by a dying carpenter on a hill outside of Jerusalem. 1,000 years from the night he sets down his pen. He does not know any of this. He just writes what the Spirit gives him. And then he rolls up the scroll, and he sleeps. We will come back to this old man, but not yet. Now move forward 1,000 years, to a Thursday night in early April, somewhere around the year 33. The lambs have been slaughtered for Passover. The blood is on the doorposts, and in an upper room above a narrow street, 13 men are sitting down to a meal that one of them will not finish. You know the meal. You have heard about the bread and the cup, but pay attention to what you are about to watch. Because over the next 24 hours, from the moment one of those 13 men slips out the door to the moment the sun goes down on Friday, and a wealthy man rolls a stone in front of a borrowed tomb, over 30 separate prophecies of the Old Testament will be fulfilled. 30. Some were written by the old man in the cave, some by farmers, some by exiles, some by prophets standing on city walls, watching armies approach. They lived hundreds of years apart. They did not coordinate, and most of them never saw what they were describing. But they all described the same day. They described the silver. They described the silence. They described the spear in the side and the bones that would not break. They described the darkness over the land at noon, a darkness so strange that pagan historians would still be trying to explain it a century later. They described the casting of lots, the vinegar, the 2 criminals at his right and his left, the wealthy man's tomb. They described the first words from the cross. They described the last, and the men who fulfilled these prophecies. Most of them had no idea they were in a scripture. The Roman soldiers gambling on a tunic did not know they were in Psalm 22. Judas did not know he was in Zechariah. Pilate did not know he was in Isaiah. They were just doing their jobs. They were just being themselves, and they were stepping, one by one, into lines written for them centuries before they were born. This is not a story about a crucifixion. This is not a story about a death. This is not a story about a Friday in spring. This is a story about a script that was written 1,000 years before the actors knew their lines. And what we are about to do, over the next half hour, is walk through that script, hour by hour, prophecy by prophecy. From the silver in Judas's hand to the spear in the soldier's grip to the seal on the tomb. Stay with me, because by the end, you will not see Good Friday the same way again. It begins with silver, 30 pieces of it, not gold, not a fortune, the exact price, in the law of Moses, that a man paid if his ox accidentally killed your servant, the compensation for a slave's life. That is what Judas Iscariot accepts in a back room of the temple courts, late on Wednesday night. He is the only one of the 12 not from Galilee. He is from Kerioth in Judea. He is the treasurer. He has been with Jesus for 3 years, has watched him walk on water, has seen him feed thousands from a boy's lunch, has heard him quiet a storm with one sentence. And tonight he sells him for the price of an ox-gored slave. But here is what most people miss. 500 years before Judas was born, a prophet named Zechariah wrote this down. He wrote that the shepherd of God's people would be valued at 30 pieces of silver. He wrote that the silver would be thrown into the temple. And then he wrote one more detail, that the silver would be used to buy the field of a potter. By Friday morning, every piece of that prophecy is fulfilled. Judas, in regret, throws the silver onto the temple floor. The chief priests will not put blood money into the treasury, so they take it out. They buy a piece of land outside the city, a field that had been used by potters to dig clay, and they use it to bury foreigners in, the potter's field. Written down in the year 500 before Christ, bought with the exact amount, by the exact people, by sundown on Friday. That is prophecy number 1. Now follow what happens next. Jesus has finished the Passover meal. He has gone with 11 of his men. Judas has slipped out into the dark to a garden on the western slope of the Mount of Olives. The garden is called Gethsemane. The word means oil press. It is where olives were crushed under stone weights to produce oil. He sweats blood there. Luke, who was a physician, names the condition hematidrosis, extreme stress that ruptures capillaries beneath the skin. The Spirit, through Luke, is telling you the body knows what is coming before the mind does. And then the soldiers arrive. They come with torches. They come with swords. They come with the chief priest's guard and a detachment of Roman troops, because Judas has told them this man might be hard to take. He kisses Jesus on the cheek. That is the signal. And the moment the soldiers lay hands on Jesus, every man around him runs. Peter draws a sword and cuts off a servant's ear. Jesus heals it. And then Peter runs too. You should sit with that for a second. Peter, the rock, the one who said he would die first, the one who walked on water, he runs. They all run. And 500 years before that night, the same prophet, Zechariah, wrote this: Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. Smite, strike, hit, and every sheep will run. That is prophecy number 2. Fulfilled in less than a minute. There is something to feel here before we move on. These were not strangers. These were not soldiers in his story. These were his friends. They had eaten with him an hour earlier. He had washed their feet that night. He had told them he loved them. And the moment he was struck, they were gone. The prophets had said this would happen. And the Spirit allowed Jesus to walk into it anyway. Peter, after a while, doubles back. He follows from a distance. He sneaks into the courtyard of Caiaphas, the high priest, where Jesus is being questioned. And he warms his hands at a charcoal fire. 3 different people recognize him as one of Jesus's men, and 3 different times Peter denies it. The 3rd time, he curses, he swears, and a rooster crows. And Jesus turns and looks at him. Peter goes out into the dark and weeps bitterly. The trial has gone for hours. False witnesses have come and gone. None agree. The high priest demands an answer. Jesus says almost nothing. They drag him to Pilate at dawn. Pilate asks him question after question. Again, almost nothing. And Pilate is amazed. Mark, whose source for everything was Peter himself, records this: Pilate marveled. A Roman governor who had sentenced thousands had never seen a man who would not defend himself. 700 years before that morning, Isaiah wrote it. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, as a lamb is brought to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb. So he openeth not his mouth. That is prophecy number 3. And the sun has not even risen yet. One more thing. The 2 men who will end up beside him on the cross. The two thieves you have heard about your whole life are already in custody by dawn. The Greek word for them is lestes. It does not mean pickpocket. It means insurrectionist. Revolution, the same word Josephus uses for the violent Jewish nationalists trying to overthrow Rome. These men are killers. They are the kind of men Rome puts on crosses to make a public statement. And Isaiah, 700 years earlier, wrote that the suffering servant would be, and listen to the exact phrase, numbered with the transgressors, counted in their company, crucified between them as one of them. The old man in the cave kept writing, "Stop for a second and count with me. The sun has not come up yet. We have not seen a hammer. We have not seen a cross. And we have already watched 3 prophecies, written between 500 and 700 years before that night, fulfilled exactly. The silver, the scattering, the silence, 3 down, over 30 to go, before the sun sets on Friday." If you are still with me, and I know some of you have heard pieces of this your whole life, but you have never seen the whole pattern laid out hour by hour, do me a small favor. Hit subscribe. There are channels that will tell you the story. This one is going to show you the script behind it. We do this every week. The next 10 minutes are going to be the densest part of what we walk through together. Because once the sun rises in Jerusalem, the prophecies start landing faster than the people fulfilling them can breathe. Here is the part nobody tells you. The men we are about to meet, the Roman soldiers, the man from Africa carrying the wood, the centurion at the foot of the cross. They did not know they were in the Bible. They were doing their jobs. They were inside a Friday, like any other Friday for them, and they were walking, step by step, into pages that had been written before their grandfathers were born. Now watch what happens next. By 6 in the morning, the verdict is in. Pilate has tried to wash his hands of it. He has sent Jesus to Herod, who sent him back. He has offered the crowd a choice. This man, or a violent insurrectionist named Barabbas, and the crowd has chosen Barabbas. He has had Jesus flogged. A Roman flogging used a leather whip with bone and metal in the strands, meant not to punish, but to break a man before the cross, so he would die faster on it. And then Pilate brings Jesus out one last time, bleeding, crowned with thorns, wrapped in a purple robe of mockery, and he says 4 words that the Apostle John would carry to his grave. "Behold the man." The crowd shouts back, "Crucify him." So Pilate hands him over, and the soldiers force him to carry the wood for his own death up a road that climbed out of Jerusalem to a hill the Romans liked to use because everyone coming into the city would see it. He does not make it the whole way. He has been awake all night. He has been beaten through 3 trials. He has lost blood in the garden and more under the whip. And somewhere on that road, the soldiers grab a man out of the crowd to carry the crossbeam the rest of the way. His name is Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene is in North Africa, modern-day Libya. Simon has come a long way for Passover. He is just trying to get into the city. He is just a face in a crowd. And a Roman centurion taps him on the shoulder and points at the wood. Simon picks it up. He carries it the rest of the way. Here is what gets me about Simon. Mark, writing his gospel 30 years later, names Simon's sons, Alexander and Rufus. He does not need to. Nobody else does. But Mark drops the names like he is winking at his readers. And a writer only winks like that because his readers know the names. Which means, by the time Mark is writing, the man who carried the cross of Christ and his sons are members of the church. Whatever happened on that road turned the man from Africa into a brother. He walked into that morning as a stranger. He walked out of it as a saint. The Romans nail him to the wood at a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. They drive iron through his wrists and his feet. They lift the cross. They drop it into a hole. The shock when it lands tears the wounds wider. Now I need you to stop and feel something here. 1,000 years before that morning, the old man in the cave wrote this. They pierced my hands and my feet. He wrote it in Psalm 22 on a scroll by lamplight. And here is the part you have to sit with. Crucifixion did not exist yet when he wrote it. The Romans did not invent it for another 700 years. The Persians had a version with impalement, but nailing a man to a wooden frame and letting him asphyxiate was a Roman refinement of the worst kind. 700 years after that old man set down his pen, Rome perfected the punishment. And 1,000 years after that old man set down his pen, they used it on the one he had been writing about. Read that again in your head. He described the method of execution before the method existed, and it gets stranger. The Romans on duty at a crucifixion got to keep the condemned man's clothing. It was their bonus. They drew lots for it like a lottery. 4 soldiers at the foot of the cross of Jesus. 4 pieces of clothing. They divide 3 of them up, 1 to each soldier, and then they come to the tunic. The tunic is seamless, woven in one piece. To tear it would ruin it, so they decide to gamble for it instead. Right there, at the foot of the cross, the old man wrote that down too. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture, written down by David in a cave, 10 centuries before 4 Roman soldiers. Bored, off duty for the worst job in the empire, killing time while a Jewish carpenter died above their heads, picked up dice and threw them on a stone for a piece of cloth. The carpenter, between breaths, could see them. He looked down. He knew what they were fulfilling. They did not. And then the crowd starts mocking him. This is the part that should break you. They do not mock him in their own words. They mock him in the words of David. They walk up to the cross and shout, quoted almost exactly from Psalm 22, "He trusted in God. Let God deliver him." They are throwing the old man's own poem back at the man fulfilling it. They are reading from the script, and they do not know they are in the script. The Roman historian Tacitus, 80 years later, would write about this execution in a single paragraph. He calls it the death of a man named Christus under Pontius Pilatus in the reign of Tiberius. He treats it as a footnote. It was not a footnote. It was the most documented death in the ancient world. By prophets 1,000 years before, by the Gospels a generation after, by Roman bureaucracy, and Jewish chronicles, and pagan historians who could not bring themselves to believe what their own sources said. And the sun is still climbing toward noon. The old man kept writing. At noon, the sun goes out. Luke writes it like a coroner. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, from 12 to 3, darkness over the whole land. He uses the Greek word skotos, the same word used in Genesis for the darkness over the deep. Before God said, "Let there be light," the word is not metaphor. It is the dark that was there before there was anything else. 750 years before that afternoon, a farmer prophet named Amos wrote it down. "I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in the clear day." He was talking about judgment. He could not have known he was also describing a weather pattern over a small Roman province on a Friday in spring. But he was, and here is what should stop you. Other people wrote about this darkness, not Christians, not believers, pagan historians. A man named Thales, writing in the 1st century, tried to explain it as a solar eclipse. Astronomically impossible, because Passover falls on a full moon. Another historian, Phlegon of Tralles, recorded a great darkness and earthquake during the reign of Tiberius. In the same year, they were trying to explain the gospel away. And in trying to explain it away, they confirmed it happened. 3 hours. The crowd goes quiet. The mocking stops. Something is wrong with the sky. And in the dark, the carpenter speaks. He cries out, in Aramaic, his mother tongue, the language he had learned as a boy in a carpenter's shop in Nazareth. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now stop. Come back with me, the old man in the cave. We have called him David. 1,000 years before that hill in Jerusalem, by a clay lamp, in the wilderness of En-Gedi, an old shepherd king sat down and wrote a poem that began with exactly those words. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? It is the opening line of Psalm 22, and here is what every Jewish person under that cross would have known. In the first century, when a rabbi quoted the first line of a psalm, he was pointing to the whole psalm. He was saying, go read it, so go read it. Psalm 22 does not just say, my God, why? It says, my hands and my feet are pierced. It says, they part my garments and cast lots for my clothing. It says, all who see me mock me. It says, they wag their heads and say he trusted in God. Let God deliver him. Every single line, written 1,000 years before, was happening in real time, in front of the people who knew the poem by heart. The carpenter on the cross was not despairing. He was teaching. He was pointing, with the last strength in his lungs, to the page. This is the page, he was saying. I am inside it. And then he says he is thirsty. A soldier dips a sponge in sour wine, vinegar, and lifts it to his mouth on the end of a reed. He drinks. 1,000 years earlier, the same old man wrote it. In my thirst, they gave me vinegar to drink. Psalm 69, verse 21. And then comes the word. He pulls himself up on the nails one last time. He breathes in, and he says one word in Greek, because the empire is Greek-speaking, and the inscription above his head is in Greek, and the soldiers who killed him will hear it in Greek. Tetelestai. It is not despair, it is not surrender. In Greek grammar, the word is in the perfect tense, meaning a debt has been paid in full. It was the word stamped on receipts in the marketplace when a bill was settled. Tetelestai, paid, done, closed. They have found it written on 1st century papyrus receipts from Egypt. When a fisherman handed over the last coin he owed Rome, the official wrote one word across it and handed it back, Tetelestai. A carpenter, hanging on a Roman cross, told the universe the bill was paid. And then, quoting David one more time, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Psalm 31, verse 5, and he dies. The soldiers come around to break the legs of the 3 men. Breaking the legs of a crucified man kills him in minutes. He can no longer push up to breathe. They break the legs of the 2 insurrectionists. They come to Jesus. He is already dead. They do not break his legs. 1,500 years before that Friday, when Israel was still in Egypt and the angel of death was passing over the houses, marked with the blood of a lamb. Then Moses received an instruction about the Passover lamb. You shall not break a single one of its bones. The lamb dies whole. John, who was there, watching from the foot of the cross, writes it himself in his gospel. This was done that the scripture might be fulfilled. A bone of him shall not be broken. He saw it. He named it as he saw it. And then one of the soldiers, just to confirm death, takes a spear and drives it into the side under the ribs. Zechariah, 500 years earlier, they shall look on him whom they pierced. By 6 p.m, the body is in a tomb. The tomb belongs to a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin named Joseph of Arimathea. New, unused, carved into the rock of a garden outside the city. Isaiah 700 years earlier, in chapter 53, he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, crucified between criminals, buried in a rich man's tomb the same day. Now I want to take you somewhere else for a minute. The night of November 23rd, 1654, a room in Paris. A 31-year-old French mathematician named Blaise Pascal The man who would invent the field of probability theory, the man who calculated odds for a living, has a vision that lasts 2 hours. He weeps through it. Afterward, he takes a piece of parchment and he writes on it. Just notes, a single page. The first word he writes at the top is fire, and then God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not the God of the philosophers and the scholars. He sews the parchment into the lining of his coat. He carries it with him for the next 8 years until he dies. A servant finds it after his death, the man who could calculate odds better than anyone alive. And what he encountered that night was so far past calculation. All he could write was the word fire, the odds of one man on one day, fulfilling all of what we have walked through. The silver, the scattering, the silence, the pierced hands, written before piercing existed, the casting of lots, the mocking word for word, the darkness, the vinegar, the unbroken bones, the spear, the rich man's tomb. Those odds are past the number of atoms in the observable universe. Pascal would have known. He would have set down his pen. He would have written one word at the top of the page. You and I have just walked through a Friday that was scheduled before time. 3 things to take with you. 1. Over 30 prophecies were fulfilled in a single 24-hour window, written between 500 and 1,000 years before the Friday they came true. Most of them were fulfilled by people who did not know they were in a script. Roman soldiers gambling on a tunic, a man from Africa pulled out of a crowd, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who had hidden his faith, a high priest who tore his robes, a governor who washed his hands. They were not actors. They were not believers. They were doing their jobs, and every one of them stepped into a line written for them centuries before they were born. 2. If God scripted that Friday down to the casting of dice, He is scripting yours too. The chaos you are inside of right now, the diagnosis, the layoff, the silence from the person who used to love you, the prayer that has gone unanswered for so long you have stopped praying it, is not chaos to Him. This is not a story about a Friday 2,000 years ago. This is not a story about a death you can study from a distance. This is not a story about a religion. This is a story about a God who writes scripts 1,000 years before the actors know their lines, and yours is one of them. And 3, the old man in the cave never met the carpenter on the hill. They lived 1,000 years apart. They never saw each other's faces. And yet in the dark, the carpenter quoted the old man back to him, in the old man's own language, with his last breath. The same Spirit was writing them both. The same Spirit is writing you. Which of these prophecies hit you the hardest? Tell me below. The one that made you stop and stare. I read every comment. The cross was not a tragedy. It was a deadline. Kept.